Back in business.
So Victor agrees to make a mate for his monster. And he is reluctant about this. So his father notices this and asks him why. Victor avoids the question, but says that before he can marry, he has to travel for 2 years. So he and Henry Clerval go off to travel around Europe. They go to Scotland. Victor convinces Clerval to stay in a town in Scotland while he goes off to work on the monster. So he begins working, and the monster, the original monster, is overseeing his work, making sure that he's doing what he promised to do. And so, as he begins working, he's contemplating what will happen, but he has an idea that the two may populate the world with other monsters of a similar nature. So he destroys his work, and the monster notices as he does this, because the monster had been watching his work. And so he swore revenge, and he swore revenge specifically on Victor's wedding. Victor went out, he was consumed with grief, of course, and he went out into the middle of the lake one night, and he fell asleep on the lake and woke up on the shore. And when he was awoken, he was arrested. They said that there had been a murder the night before, and so he was taken to identify the body. The body was that of Henry Clerval, and Victor assumes that it has been the monster that's killed him. So Victor's father has him freed, and they go home so Victor and Elizabeth may marry. And on that evening, Victor remembers what the monster had said about him coming on Victor's wedding night. Victor assumes the monster is coming after him, so he tells Elizabeth to go to bed, go and rest, and leaves himself in the open. However, he hears Elizabeth scream, and he is very confused at first, and he realizes that he has caused yet another death. So he blamed himself for this death, and he devoted the rest of his life to the monster. After Elizabeth's death, his father died as well from grief. So upon pursuing the monster, the story picks up again with the letters of Captain Robert Walton. You learn this time through the letters that Victor eventually died in the care of Robert Walton. And after his death, the monster comes to grieve over the body.
Thank you, Nurse Simon. Now, I'm sure that was quite a lot of information you just gave us. So, the biggest things you need to pull away from this is that Walton finds Frankenstein in the frozen tundra. Frankenstein relates his life story and the grieving he finds from creating his monster, with the monster killing his brothers and friends and wife. And this leads to many misery within Frankenstein's life, and eventually causes his death. Now, I'll turn it back to Nurse Levis, and she explains more in detail, specifically, the characters within this novel.
Sorry. Now, in order to understand this novel properly, you must understand Victor Frankenstein. Frankenstein's life is consumed with strong affections. He has very strong relationships with everybody that he meets. Romanticism is heavily prevalent throughout the novel, and it very much impacts the way that Victor thinks, the way he feels. And it's Mary Shelley's writing style that impacts this. He's known as the creator. He is responsible for bringing the monster into the world. He's very interested in his purpose in life. Now, I think that many of you may be familiar with Myers-Briggs personality types. We have formulated a Myers-Briggs personality type for Victor Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein is an INFP, which means that he is very focused on making the world a better place for all of humanity. He's very focused on finding his meaning in life. And a quote that I have here as a description of an INFP is that they are very flexible and laid back until one of their values is violated. They can become very aggressive defenders. So Victor as a person is very much in tune with nature, in tune with his purpose in life, trying to make a mark for himself. And when something happens that compromises that, he can become defensive. All right. One theme that is prevalent throughout the novel that you notice with Victor is that he can be very weak in health. However, this is usually followed by some sort of great emotional tragedy. So his emotional life is very, very prevalent on his physical life. He becomes sick after he hears news of something that gets him depressed. He is very much emotionally in tune and physically in tune. The two coincide very much. He's Genovese, which is, Geneva is in Switzerland, and so he comes from a Swiss family. Relationships are very, very important in Victor's life. He has strong relationships with everyone. He very much connects with people. Suffering. Suffering also is very prevalent in the fact that Victor, though he may be young at points, maybe emotionally uneven, he undergoes great tragedies. His mother dies when he's 17. He causes the death of several people in his life, several people that he cares for very much. So Victor is a very depressed person, and he goes through a lot of suffering. Elizabeth. Elizabeth was brought into his family as an adopted sister, but they were told to call each other cousin. They thought of each other more in a platonic way at first, but as they connected, they had a very, very strong connection. They were less than a year apart, and Victor's mother's last request was that Victor may someday marry Elizabeth. So the two of them together had a very strong connection, and Elizabeth was kind of a sense of security for Victor. Victor was very interested, as we said, in the greater good. He wanted to do what was best for all, not just for one person. He wanted to better the world. Metaphysical life. I have here a definition of metaphysical. Concerned with abstract thoughts or subjects, such as existence, casualty, and truth. Victor is very much interested in this idea of life that isn't just what it appears to be, what may come from different events, what may come from creating anything. And I have here a quote, "Man's yesterday may ne'er be like his morrow." Throughout the novel, there are several short, like 5-line poems inserted throughout the novel. This is the ending quote from one of them, and this relates to Frankenstein because he very much goes on through life. Even though he suffers his tragedies, he still continues, and he kind of tries to put the past behind him while still feeling that weight inside. All right. Now, for the monster. The monster wants a mate, and he is a very lonely person, so he's consumed with loneliness, and that drives a lot of the stuff he does. He was created by Victor, and as we will explain a little bit further momentarily, he and Victor have a lot of similarities. He doesn't have any control over his emotion. He becomes very consumed with anger, with any sort of emotion, and lets it overtake him, and probably isn't controlling his actions that arise from that. He's confused. At the beginning of the novel, when the monster relates his story, he does this through 5 chapters of speaking, quotes. So he has momentarily taken over the narration of the novel through quotes. And as he's doing this, he's explaining how confused he was when he awoke from his creation. He didn't have any memory of a childhood, no memory of family. He didn't know what to do. He was also very knowledge-driven. He wanted to know a lot of stuff. He didn't know how to speak initially. He learned how to speak while following villagers around. he very much wanted to know why he was there, what was going on. And in his narration, he gives this quote, "I was a poor, helpless, miserable wretch." Basically, that gives you the monster's idea of himself. So a lot of times throughout the novel, you hear Victor explaining his thoughts of the monster, how he's this terrible being, and he's very biased toward it. However, in this quote, you get to see how the monster sees himself. He sees himself as sort of useless and helpless. And the monster, as I said, has a lot of parallels to Victor. As his creator and creation, as that relationship is seen, Victor sees the monster with disgust, but the two of them are very similar. They have a lot of similarities in the sense that they work together, they both are very emotionally driven, and a lot of the traits that Victor had, he passed on to the monster. Now, Justine. Justine, as we said, was the servant that was brought into their family, and into the Frankenstein family. And she was accused of William's murder, and she was convicted and killed. So she joined Victor's family when she was 12 years old. She was very much her father's favorite, and she was very much her father's favorite. And when her father passed away, her mother didn't really know how to treat her because she thought that she was just this different kind of person and didn't know what to do. And so when the Frankenstein family took her in, they gave her an education. As I said, Justine was only 12 years old. She didn't have a lot of an education because of her father's death, of being in a big family. She was one of 4, I believe. And so the Frankensteins took her in and taught her to be a servant. However, it is noted that a servant in Switzerland or in Geneva is very different than what you would think of as a servant in France. They're not losing their dignity in being in this position. They're thought of as a member of the family almost. All right. Caroline was Victor's mother, and Justine saw Caroline as a role model, and she kind of mimicked her, tried to be just like her. She took on a lot of her traits. Justine was a pleasing person for Victor. She was very calming for him, was a good friend. And when Elizabeth's description is given, it is given through the eyes of Elizabeth through a letter. And Elizabeth mentions the story, mentions that Victor sees her in the way that Ariosto saw Angelica. Now, Ariosto was an author of Orlando Furioso, which was an epic poem. And he describes Angelica's beauty with a lot of emotion, and so the two of them have a good connection.
Thank you. Nurse. Letters. Now, the symbol we have for characterization is one of the feet. Sorry. Because the characterizations support plot. So, let me just put that right there. Now, we will go into the mood of the story, which is also represented by a foot, because it again supports the plot and allows you to gain an emotional attraction to the novel, which, as noted, this novel is very much emotional. And I'd also just like to note, with what Nurse Levis was saying with our characters, I'd like to relate it back to our theme. As you saw with Victor, he could not escape his mistake of creating this horrible monster. So obviously the theme directly applies to him. With the monster, he could not escape the mistake because he was the mistake. Man had created this mistake, which was he, and now he had to deal with that. And with Justine, she couldn't escape because of eventually running into the path of the monster, it killed her. So all in all, she could not escape the mistake of Victor. Now, I shall turn it over to Nurse Snyder, and she will explain to us about the mood of Frankenstein.
Alright, the mood of this novel is it's not your everyday happy story. It's very, very dark and gloomy and depressing. And it's a lot of solitude. Everybody's alone. The monster's alone. He's excluded from everybody. And Victor spends all his life, he loses his closest people in his life and he's alone. And the theme is very, very dark and very gloomy and depressing. And so here's a photo story to give you that. Brett wrote the poem, photo story.
Stop it.
I did.
Good.
Shall we try this again?
Thank you.
I killed all those people. Clairvaux, Elizabeth, Father, Justine, and little William. I created a demon with inhumane powers and strength, unmatched even by me, the Creator. I intentionally wanted to help mankind. I sought to give them the greatest gift possible. But I gave them him, the demon. I loved my family and friends, but I gave them him, the demon. I wanted an admirable life, but I made him the demon.
So as you can see, everything refers back to the monster, the demon. It's all basically Victor's fault. I mean, he's at fault. He killed people and he wouldn't admit to it. He just kept letting it happen. But really, he couldn't escape the mistake. There's no way to stop this monster, this being who's stronger than mankind, who's supernatural. Yeah.
Thank you, Nurse Snyder. Now, we will continue on with the addition of the torso or body of our little monster. And this represents the figurative language that is found within Frankenstein. Now you see, when you add in the figurative language, you connect the theme and all the other parts to the plot and everything else. The figurative language is the connecting bond. It is the main piece. Now,
Down, lower right. Lower right to drive. Lower right to drive. You have to do it lower right.
Oh.
Yay.
okay, thank you. Our first figurative language is imagery, which is found many times throughout this novel. An example, the child still struggled and loaded me with epithets, which carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. This is the imagery that Mary Shelley gives us when the monster is killing little William. Obviously, this is a very gruesome part, but it shows how Mary Shelley wants these people to understand that life isn't exactly happy. And again, with our theme, it's not. You can't escape some things that you might want to.
You can also see the emotion that the monster is showing here.
Yes. Another quote. The sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the seasons, tempest and calm, the silence of the winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers. Again, another illustration of the imagery that Mary Shelley gives us so that we can get closer, get more drawn in to this novel. Yes?
Do the narrators kind of change? Because it seemed like the monster was a narrator in that one.
As we will talk later in our structure, yes. It begins with R. Walton with his letters, and then moves on to the narration of Frankenstein's life. And throughout Frankenstein's life, he displays the narration given to him by the monster. Now, another figurative language used by Mary Shelley is a metaphor. Very appropriate illustration is this. The wounded deer dragging his fainting limbs to some untrodden brake, there to gaze upon the arrow which had pierced it, and to die, was but a type of me. This was Victor describing himself. Once he had made this monster, as the metaphor brings out, it was as if an arrow was in him, hurting him. This monster was there and he couldn't get rid of it. He could not escape what this monster had brought, this tragedy, this mistake that he had made. He could not escape it. There's also similes. I was like the Arabian, who had been buried with the dead and found a passage of life, aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. This is Frankenstein again. This is before he had made the monster. This is when he had realized that he had thought of this brilliant idea, that he could create life. Again, Mary Shelley uses this figurative language to express emotion so you can get drawn in with these characters, so that you realize exactly how they feel. And with this, it shows how he was so excited, but then later on you realize how much despair he gained because of the increased emotion that he obtained. Now, symbolism is highly used throughout this. A symbol that was seen as the monster is indefinite result of action. Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey. This was uttered by the monster himself to Victor. Now, as we said, go back. There we go. The monster is a symbol for indefinite result of actions. The monster now feels like he has that power, that the result that Victor caused from his actions causes a devastating amount. The monster has no respect for Victor, even though Victor was his creator. The monster totally disregards that and only focuses on the fact that Victor has brought this wretchedness and now has to solve it.
Another character in this story is Elizabeth, who represents a safe hold in our lives, that one person who's always there no matter what. She's going to protect us, she's going to love us no matter what happens.
Victor also shows ambition, and quote for this: "The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul, in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season, but my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature."
The setting represents changes and stages in life. The setting progresses, and you can see Victor moving to different places as he's moving in different stages of his life. In the quote we have here, "The immense mountains and precipices that overhung me on every side, the sound of the river raging among the rocks, and the dashing of the waterfalls around us spoke of mighty power as omnipotence." And also, "I must commence a destructive and almost endless journey across the mountainous ices of the ocean, amidst cold that few of the inhabitants could long endure, which I could not hope to survive."
This shows how life begins without any effect. You seem like you're on top of the world, but as life continues, you realize that realization comes into play that life isn't as easy as you think. Also, we have travel, and it's impossible to run from your actions. I enjoyed this scene, and yet my enjoyment was embittered both by the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future. This was uttered by Victor, and he was showing how, indeed, he could not escape his past. He wanted to leave, but he could not. Now, a side reference that Mary Shelley uses in Frankenstein is the mythological story of Prometheus. Prometheus is a titan who goes on and tries to help mankind. And he takes fire from Zeus, and this enrages Zeus. But he does so, and Zeus ends up having Prometheus tied to a rock, and his liver is eaten every day by an eagle or vulture, depending on the interpretation of the story. And Prometheus, to go back really quickly, is an example of Frankenstein because he wants to help mankind. Zeus, the one who is being used by Prometheus, is the ambitions. The eagle is the monster. It's causing despair upon Prometheus and upon Victor. And the savior of Prometheus, who eventually helps him, is death, because it finally gives resolution to Victor. He finally can get away from this problem that he had made.
Also, it should be noted that that Mary Shelley gives an alternate title for this piece, which is The Modern Prometheus. All right. So, as can be seen in our movie poster, there are a lot of parallels between Victor and the monster. So, we have a quote here that supports this. I wish, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to the feelings of my affection until the great object, which swallowed up every habit of my nature, should be completed.
Now, the point of view of this,
as Jacob had asked earlier,
is first-person participant, which is, by Victor, Frankenstein. Example, listen to my history and you will perceive how Yes. It is determined. This is Frankenstein relating to R. Walton before he starts his narration. And the monster dialogues his ideas through the narration given by Frankenstein. I will soon explain to what these feelings tended.
So the monster himself isn't actually narrating, but he is kind of taking over the position of narrator through a bunch of quotes.
And this point of view shows how the emotions and thoughts are more easily displayed through each character, and it gives you the full spectrum of ideas and opinions of each person. Now, Mary Shelley uses a very unique structure throughout her story. She uses letters, which gives it a unique aspect. People around this time period had not used this before, and it allows emotion to be displayed to the fullest extent possible.
And the letters are not, they're most prevalent in the beginning and the end when you're hearing R. Walton's view of everything. But there are also several letters throughout explaining Elizabeth's point of view and such.
It's a chronological explanation of Frankenstein, in which lets them get the full spectrum. And a writing style, as already noted, that was used primarily by Mary Shelley was Romanticism, which was a movement during this time period around the 1700s, early 1800s, and the story was based upon the 1700s, which was against the Age of Enlightenment, which you probably heard about in science class, which basically, Romanticism was rebellion basically against how science ruled nature. The Romantics believed that romance and emotion is what ruled nature, not the science. And this was heavily used by Mary Shelley. And this showed the pure of nature, the essence of nature.
Doctor, I do believe you want to explain Mary Shelley's life to us now.
Yes. Now, Mary Shelley was an interesting individual. Unfortunately, she is now dead. So we have this tombstone. Mary Shelley, a woman of love, lust, and literature. Mary Shelley was a famous novel. People will always remember her. Now, love and lust, obviously, as we explained, she was a romantic. And throughout her life, many things of emotion happened. Her mother died when she was only 11 days old. Her father raised her as a philosopher, but she eventually fell in love with Percy Shelley, who was another philosopher. And she always stayed with the feminist movements that her mother had thought of. She continued on, and with the marriage of Percy, while at the same time, of course, Percy was already married to a pregnant woman. So she was a mistress. They go off with their friend Lord Byron and Pacioli, and Lord Byron sets up a contest to write a horror story about reanimation. And that's how Frankenstein was produced. Percy helped them finish it, but that's how that continues.
So a lot of the events in Mary Shelley's life affected the novel. And throughout the novel, we can see a lot of romanticism, of course. And the romanticism then led to the progression of romanticism as a writing style. And Mary Shelley was one of the first to use this. And author information, of course, extends the figure, the whole body. That's why it's an arm, and the same with the historical importance. Now, relating that to modern literature as well, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I know some of you probably have read this, and some of you may not have. But the idea of Victor's fight for the greater good can be seen in this novel as Dumbledore and Grindelwald fight for the greater good. All right. And thus you see it all, the whole body comes together to bring about an entire completed monster.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Michael, it won't stop.